Half of the world's population depends on white rice as their main food. In many Indian homes, there is a daily food debate. Someone says, stop eating rice. Rice causes diabetes. Another person says, no, no, chapati is healthier than rice. Then someone else says, millets are the new superfoods. And recently, you might also hear gluten is dangerous. So now everyone is confused. Is rice really unhealthy? Are millets actually superior? Is chapati better than rice? Or are we missing the real problem? Today, let's look at what global nutrition research and cancer prevention guidelines actually say, because the real answer might surprise you. Most people ask which grain is healthiest, rice, wheat, or millets, but according to nutrition science, this is actually the wrong question. The more important question is what should form the base of our daily diet? According to guidelines and major research groups, a healthy diet should mainly consist of whole grains, vegetables, fruits, beans, legumes, and fiber rich foods. These foods should form the major part of our meals. Why? Because strong research shows that diet rich in whole grains and dietary fiber reduce the risk of colorectal cancer. And large global studies estimate that every 30 grams of whole grains per day reduces colorectal cancer risk by about 5%. And people who eat 3 servings of whole grains daily have about 6% lower cancer mortality. So, the main message from global nutrition science is not stop eating rice, but the real message is much simpler, that is, improve the quality of carbohydrate. Here is where things get interesting. If whole grains are healthier and white rice is a refined grain, does that mean rice is bad? Let's understand something important first. Basically, a whole grain has three parts: bran, germ, and endosperm. Bran contains fiber and antioxidants, germ contains vitamins and healthy fats, and endosperm mainly starch. So, when grains are refined, the bran and germ are removed, and only the starchy part is left, that is, the refined grains, what we call white rice, maida, white bread, and refined wheat flour. And because fiber is removed, refined grains often raise blood sugar more quickly. This is why diets high in refined grains are linked with high risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic diseases. But there is another important concept here. You may have heard of something called the glycemic index or GI. It measures how fast a food raises blood sugar. So, food with high GI causes rapid sugar spikes, and food with low GI releases glucose more slowly. For example, higher GI food includes polished white rice, refined wheat products, and lower GI foods may include brown rice, some millets, and whole grains. But here is something most people don't realize: the glycemic effect changes depending on how the food is eaten. Rice eaten alone behaves very differently from rice eaten with vegetables, dal, protein, and fiber. When rice is part of a balanced meal, the blood sugar rise becomes much slower. So now we come to the big question everyone asks. If white rice is refined, does that mean rice is unhealthy? The answer is not that simple. White rice is not poison. It has been eaten safely for thousands of years. In fact, half of the world's population depends on rice as a staple food. However, some studies have observed something interesting. Very high consumption of white rice may increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, especially in populations that eat large quantities daily. For example, the famous global PURE study led by Salim Yusuf analyzed more than 132,000 people across 21 countries, including India, found that very high white rice intake was associated with higher diabetes risk, particularly in South Asian populations. Some analysis suggests that each addition of 150 grams of white rice per day may increase diabetes risk by about 6 to 11%. But interestingly, the same research did not find strong links with cardiovascular disease or overall mortality. So the issue is not rice itself, the real problem is usually something else. When vegetables, legumes, and whole foods are missing from the plate, even a traditional staple like rice can become part of an unhealthy pattern. Many people say chapati is healthier than rice. Chapati is made from whole wheat flour, so it actually contains more fiber, slower glucose release, and B vitamins. But wheat also contains gluten. For most people, gluten is not harmful. However, some people with celiac disease, gluten intolerance, and certain IBS conditions may experience symptoms like bloating, diarrhea, and intestinal inflammation. For these individuals, gluten free grains like rice or millets may be better options. But now, another grain has started getting a lot of attention. You have probably heard people saying things like millets are superfoods. So this raises an important question. Are millets actually healthier than rice? Millets are gaining attention for several good reasons. Compared with polished white rice, many millets contain more fiber, more protein, and more minerals, including nutrients like calcium, iron, magnesium, and zinc. Because of their higher fiber content, many millets also tend to produce a lower blood sugar response, which is why they are often recommended in diets of diabetes management and metabolic health. And another advantage is that millets are naturally gluten free, making them suitable for people with conditions such as celiac disease or gluten intolerance. There is also an interesting environmental and safety aspect. However, millets are not perfect either. They contain natural compounds called phytates, which are called anti nutrients. They can reduce mineral absorption. But traditional cooking methods that have been used for generations, such as soaking, fermenting, or sprouting, can significantly reduce these compounds, making them healthier option. It is also important to remember that not all millets are the same. Different varieties offer different nutritional benefits. For example, finger millet or ragi is one of the richest plant sources of calcium. Foxtail millet is known for its low glycemic response, which can be useful for blood sugar control. And pearl millet or bajra is particularly rich in iron and magnesium. So now we come to the big question. If millets have these advantages, does that mean we should stop eating rice completely? No, not necessarily. Rice has been a staple food for thousands of years, and billions of people depend on it as an important source of energy. The real issue usually arises when the diet becomes too heavily dependent on refined grains, while fiber rich foods like vegetables, legumes, and whole grains are missing. Health outcomes depend much more on the overall dietary pattern, not on a single food. So, rice can absolutely remain part of a healthy diet when it is balanced with fiber rich foods and protein. In fact, there is something even more important than many people overlook. The real issue today is not rice versus chapati. The bigger problem is the growing consumption of highly refined grain foods. Many modern foods are made from refined white flour or maida, such as bakery biscuits, cakes and pastries, white bread, instant noodles, white flour paratha, samosa, and bakery puffs. These foods often combine three things: refined flour, that is maida, oil, sugar, and this combination makes them very easy to overeat. So, reducing these foods may actually have a much bigger impact on health than constantly arguing about rice versus chapati or millets. But there is one more interesting fact about rice that many people don't. In many households, rice is not just a food, it is the main part of almost every meal. Many nutrition experts today recommend something very simple: grain diversity. That is, instead of eating the same grain every day, rotating different grains through the week can improve nutrient intake. But at this point, many people say, fine, then I'll just stop white rice and switch to brown rice. And yes, brown rice does have advantages. Because it's a whole grain, the bran and germ layers are still intact, so it contains more fiber and micronutrients than polished white rice. However, there is one interesting scientific detail many people don't know. Rice plants can absorb inorganic arsenic from soil and irrigation water, and this arsenic tends to accumulate more in the outer bran layer of the grain. Because brown rice keeps that outer layer, it can sometimes contain more arsenic than white rice. Now, this does not mean rice is dangerous. For most people, normal rice consumption poses very low risk, and simple cooking practices can reduce arsenic exposure even further. Washing rice thoroughly, cooking rice in extra water, draining the excess water after cooking. These simple steps can significantly reduce arsenic levels. But instead of worrying too much about which single grain is perfect, a better long term strategy is simply rotating grains. First, try rotating your grains instead of eating the same one every day. For example, rice on some days, millets like ragi or foxtail millet, or jowar roti on other days, and whole wheat chapatis sometimes. This simple habit increases fiber intake and nutrient diversity. Second, try to balance your rice meals. Rice eaten alone may rise blood sugars more quickly, but when it's combined with foods like dal, vegetables, proteins, the overall glucose response becomes much healthier and more balanced. And the third is try to reduce highly refined foods. Limit foods like biscuits, cakes, pastries, instant noodles, white bread, and deep fried snacks. These foods are usually low in fiber and very easy to overeat. And finally, try to increase dietary fiber in general. Add more vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, and millets. Fiber supports gut health, blood sugars control, and long term disease prevention. So instead of constantly asking which grain is the best, a better question might be, is my overall plate balanced and rich in fiber? Because long term health depends much more on overall dietary patterns than on a single. So, what is the final takeaway? White rice itself is not inherently harmful, but diets that rely heavily on large quantities of refined grains with very little fiber may increase the risk of diabetes, metabolic diseases, and certain cancers. So, replacing part of refined grain intake with whole grains or millets can improve fiber intake, nutrient density, and overall metabolic health. And this brings us to an important reminder. This is why many nutrition guidelines recommend diversifying grains rather than relying heavily on just one staple food. Instead, it consistently shows that balance, variety, and overall dietary quality matters the most. If you enjoy science based explanations of nutrition that are simple and practical, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Here we break down what global research and international guidelines say about diet, cancer prevention, diabetes, and heart diseases. And in the next video, we will explore another topic that many people are confused about: red meat and processed meat. What does research actually say about their role in cancer and metabolic disease? How much is considered safe to eat, and what are the healthier alternatives? Subscribe and follow the series. Thank you for watching.